So now what they want to do is they realize, wow, we may have overlooked Wilmer for all of these years since 1998. And they started looking at what evidence do we have in the Colonial Parkway murders series that could be compared against Wilmer's DNA from his death. And we had been begging them for the last couple of years to please go back and retest the rape kit from Robin Edwards from September 1987. So that's incident number 2 in the Colonial Parkway murders. And there was very little DNA left, and it was highly degraded. But as you and I have discussed before on Silver Linings, the DNA capabilities have gotten so much better and so much more refined so that a small sample, which might not have been all that usable a few years ago, is now much more viable in this case, we're up to about 2024 than it ever had been before. So they tested the evidence from Wilmer's death against the rape kit from Robin Edwards, and they got a match. Well, not only that, they also got a match against a woman whose rape murder we were not familiar with at that time, named Teresa Howell.
That's Bill Thomas, the brother of Colonial Parkway's murder victim Cathy Thomas, a victim's advocate, and the host of the Mind Over Murder podcast. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Bill is a victim's advocate and the host of the Mind Over Murder podcast and the brother of Cathy Thomas, a 27-year-old United States Naval Academy graduate who's believed to have been one of the first victims of a string of murders on the Middle Peninsula of Virginia known as the Colonial Parkway's murders. The murders mostly involve couples who were killed together on and off the Parkway between 1986 and 1989. In part 1, which I recommend you go back and listen to, we discuss the 1987 murders of 14-year-old Robin Edwards and 24-year-old David Knobling. They were found dead near Ragged Island on the southern portion of the James River. They were the second in the series and the first to be linked by DNA. We're going to talk about the announcement this January of the DNA link between Wilmer Sr. and the murders of Cathy and Becky. Cathy and Becky's murders were the first known murders in the series that became known as the Colonial Parkway's murders. They were also the 5th and the 6th victims to be linked to Wilmer Sr. In that episode, we also talk about Bill's relationship with the FBI, and we discuss the Wilmer brothers. Today, we're going to talk about how we suspect the FBI and the Virginia State Police were able to get around DNA restrictions to identify Wilmer Sr. We're going to talk about the history of the involvement of Bill and the other families that, for him, came and became intense after a leak of crime scene photos from Becky and Cathy's murders. We're also going to discuss the March 1988 murder of 18-year-old Lori Ann Powell, a high school graduate who got out of her car on U.S. Route 17, close to where my family lives, and was found on the James River near Ragged Island. Some speculation that we'll discuss is about how Wilmer may have been following the couple and then took Powell when the couple split up. We're also going to discuss the disappearance the next month in April 1988 of 20-year-old Keith Call and 18-year-old Cassandra Hailey, 2 Christopher Newport University students who were leaving a party. Their car was found near the York River Overlook. Their disappearances are the only case where bodies have not been found. There are reasons, though, to believe those cases are still solvable. Bill and I are going to continue our conversation about the Wilmer brothers and how Wilmer Sr. came on the radar screen of law enforcement because of Keith and Cassandra's disappearances, and how a description of his distinct blue-green 1968 Dodge Dakota pickup truck that had gear that would be used by a waterman put him right in the middle of the investigation. We're also going to talk about how he was dropped as a suspect before several other murders were committed. We'll also discuss Keith and Cassandra's disappearance and how it gave law enforcement their first clues about Wilmer Sr.'s MO, the ruse that William Sr. appeared to use to lure people in, and some indications that he may have stalked some of the victims in advance and that other victims were opportunistic. We're also going to dive into curious leads about a small security company called Liberty Security that may have a link to Wilmer Sr. and a second man, Ron Little, who owned it. One victim, 28-year-old Brian Pettinger, worked there and was murdered in December 1987 and found in the James River. Another victim, Powell, also worked there, and she was murdered in March 1988. Powell's murder was connected to Wilmer Sr., and Pettinger's has not been. But there's reason to believe that Little wanted Pettinger dead. Liberty Security also has a connection to Robert Edwards' mother, who also worked there. Most visitors travel east to west on the Virginia peninsulas, but not locals. They travel across them into southern Maryland and North Carolina by roads and boats. We're also going to talk about why this truly might be better named the Peninsula Murders in reference to the Northern Neck, the Middle Peninsula, the Virginia Peninsula, and even southern Maryland and North Carolina.
There were three brothers, and the two older brothers, Keith is the oldest, and Alan, our longtime suspect, is the middle brother, but that they were capable of violence, and you didn't mess with them.
Yeah. And I think that comes back down to, from my perspective, if you really plug into the community and the people who know, maybe you don't get your suspect, but you'll get fingers pointing probably in the direction of your suspect. The one thing that did surprise me when I heard about it was that I was actually surprised when you told me that he was an early suspect, because I probably didn't give law enforcement enough credit to think of a guy in the Northern Neck as, given the distance. But the other piece for me is, how did they move on from him? Do we know?
We do. Well, first of all, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. ends up, as I understand it, on the FBI's radar within a couple of days of incident number 3 in the Colonial Parkway murders. And that's the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. And Keith and Sandy were on a first date. They were students at Christopher Newport University. They disappeared on their way home from a party. They were trying to meet at 2 a.m. curfew, and Keith's car was found on the Colonial Parkway, but Keith and Sandy were never found, and to this day are technically a missing persons case, although it's been, 38 years, I think, and I don't think they're walking through the door anytime soon. Keith's Toyota Celica was found on the Colonial Parkway. As I said, this is incident number 3 now in the series. It's only a mile or two away from where my sister Cathy's car was found with their bodies inside it in 1986. So now we're in April 1988.
And then also Robin and David weren't found far away either, right?
It might be 20, 25 minutes.
Right.
And it's not on the Colonial Parkway. So it's a Virginia State Police case because
But we're talking about a narrow peninsula, right?
Correct.
So even
So
25 minutes away, yeah.
it's not that far. But
Right.
one of the early leads that developed in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey was the FBI really threw a lot of resources at these cases because they recognized at this point we may be dealing with a serial killer. We've had Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski in 86, Robin Edwards and David Noble in 87. Now we're in April 1988, and we have a missing couple, and the car is found under very similar circumstances to where the other vehicles have been found, and we're back on the Colonial Parkway. So they start working this hard, and one of the things that they discover is they fan out talking to people about different things that have happened on the Colonial Parkway, which is this 23-mile long ribbon of land, quite beautiful national park land, extremely quiet and dark, and known as a place that couples go to be romantic, to hook up, whatever. So as they fan out to look for more information, they start discovering that couples tell them similar stories about being accosted by a man driving a very distinctive blue-green pickup truck. It's an antique even back then. It's a 1966 Dodge Dakota pickup truck, faded blue with lettering on the door and a rig on the back that would be used for crabbing and oystering. To a civilian's eye, at least to my eye, it looked like something a tow truck would have on the back. But that's designed, of course, to pull in nets and pots and that sort of thing.
So
now,
we know distinctive truck waterman.
Right.
Right? Probably. Right.
Right. And they also know that these couples have been involved in these very frightening encounters where this man comes up in this very distinctive truck, hops out of the truck, and interacts with them almost like he's law enforcement, but he's not dressed in a police officer's uniform. He's got like coveralls on. But he typically would go up, pound on the window of the car, demand driver's licenses. Interestingly, not registrations, just licenses. And interacts with these people in a very frightening way where he's telling them, you don't belong here, it's past curfew, you need to get out of here, that kind of thing. And everybody remembers this guy, but no one knows where he is. So as the first few days of the investigation unfold, the guy who's in charge of the radios for the FBI, remember, this is a pre-internet, pre-cell phone environment. So they use high-powered law enforcement radios, and they've got a guy who's responsible for setting up the base station for the radios and keeping everybody in communication. He himself, the radio guy, radios in and says, I've heard you guys talking about this truck. I'm on the highway, which is probably Route 17, and I'm driving next to the guy who's behind the wheel of the truck you're looking for. And so they got very lucky with this radio operator having a sharp eye. And he got the license plate. So in addition to this truck being super distinctive, it's a one of a kind, the license plate is E.M. Raw, as in Edam Raw, which of course is a crabbing, oystering joke and also obviously an off-color pun. Right. So this guy's got vanity plates on this truck.
He might as well have painted, hey, it's me.
It's me. I'm here. So, of course, now the FBI has gotten really lucky through hard work. They track down where this guy lives, and he lives up in Lancaster, Virginia. And a couple of days later, 2 FBI agents roll up on him And they discover Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., the longtime suspect, is out in the grassy driveway of his home, cleaning out the truck in question using bleach or solvent in a way that seems extremely suspicious to the two FBI agents. They end up questioning him, and then they return with a search warrant, and they are fairly certain they've identified this man who may be connected to the Colonial Parkway murders. And they search his home, his truck. They discover knives, guns, handcuffs, which proves to be very important because a number of these victims were restrained, an extensive collection of pornography, and they are fairly certain they've got their man.
Jackpot.
Yeah. So then when you asked how does he end up getting away, escaping their clutches, this is really unfortunate. They end up giving him 2 polygraph exams. And I've actually tracked down the retired polygraph examiner, who was one of the top guys at the FBI. And he told me they gave him 2 polygraph exams. One was he passed, and the other was inconclusive. In other words, as he said to me, Bill, I can't tell you whether the man was telling the truth or whether he was being evasive. So 2 polygraph exams, he passes one is an uncertain outcome. But even he says to me over the phone, this is a couple of years ago now, Bill, we should have never let that guy go because he checked so many boxes of what the FBI profilers said they were looking for. And there was a suspicion that his older brother, Keith Wilmer, was also potentially involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. So they let him go. And I heard this story, just as I've outlined to you now, from my father in 1988, because he heard it from the FBI agents who were working the case. And the agents were certain they had the right guy. And Irv Wells, who was the SAC, special agent in charge of the Norfolk office at that time, he was certain they had the right guy. And when they made the decision to let him go, Irv Wells said to whichever higher up made this call, he said, you better effing be right, because they were all convinced that Wilmer was the right guy. And of course, he was the right guy.
I would hope that today, based on a polygraph with what we know about how they're just generally unreliable and what we've also learned about, the Journal for Applied Psychology did this research. They didn't find really significant difference in polygraph accuracy between psychopaths and non-psychopaths. But what they found was that there was a subset of people who met what they call Robert Hare's definition of what a psychopath was. Subset of them that had a lower fear response, lower anxiety, and higher emotional detachment. So they didn't have the physiological responses that would tip off a polygraph. So I would hope today that in a serial killer case, you would sort of like throw out your suspect polygraph data.
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is, and this is where the FBI starts to shift uncomfortably in their seat when I start asking questions like this. I can understand how, by the standards of 1988, they might not have been able to nail Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. for the Colonial Parkway murders. What I don't get is, given how many boxes that guy checked of the kind of person they said they were looking for, how in the world did they never revisit Wilmer? They didn't look at Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. as a suspect, as far as I know, until 2024, I think, 7 years after the guy had died.
Do we know what it was that caused them to look at it?
Oh, well, here's what I hear.
Okay.
And we have a lot of sources inside this investigation.
This is new to me, so.
Yeah. So apparently, several years ago, our case agent held a meeting in which she presented her theories on the Colonial Parkway murders, and she was very focused on a particular suspect who was not Wilmer. And she presents to a group of FBI agents who've been the lead agent in the Colonial Parkway murders investigation over the years. So there's multiple agents in the room. And she presents for several hours. It takes a long time. It's a very complicated case, multiple crime scenes, et cetera, et cetera. So apparently they get to the end, and one of the longtime case agents says, "That's all well and good, but I still like my guy." She says, "Who's your guy?" He says, "Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., but it might be a moot point because he died back in 2017. So that's my understanding. And if the FBI wants to correct me, they know how to get a hold of me. But I heard this from the FBI agents who were in the room. He says, "That's all well and good. I still like my guy. Who's your guy?" Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. So at that point, they go back and they take another look at Wilmer, and they discover they have a DNA profile from Wilmer when he died at home in 2017. Died of natural causes. He was estranged from his family. His body wasn't found for 3 or 4 weeks. This is around Christmas time. And the body had been badly treated, shall we say, by lying there
for humid weather on the northern neck. Yeah.
And they had a DNA profile, and that proved that was Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. So now what they want to do is they realize, wow, we may have overlooked Wilmer for all of these years since 1998. And they started looking at what evidence do we have in the Colonial Parkway murders series that could be compared against Wilmer's DNA from his death. And we had been begging them for the last couple of years to please go back and retest the rape kit from Robin Edwards from September 1987. So that's incident number 2 in the Colonial Parkway murders. And there was very little DNA left, and it was highly degraded. But as you and I have discussed before on Silver Linings, the DNA capabilities have gotten so much better and so much more refined so that a small sample, which might not have been all that usable a few years ago, is now much more viable. In this case, we're up to about 2024 than it ever had been before. So they tested the evidence from Wilmer's death against the rape kit from Robin Edwards, and they got a match. Well, not only that, they also got a match against a woman whose rape murder we were not familiar with at that time, named Teresa Howell. She had been murdered in Hampton in July 1989. So now we have a match against 3 people. We've got Robin Edwards, David Nobley, who was with her the night she died, and Teresa Howell. So
here's where I'm a little confused. I mean, I have a theory, but normally you can't upload a suspect's DNA into CODIS, which is the FBI's database for DNA, unless you have, unless they've been convicted of a felony in some states, and then there's some qualifying arrest charges in other states. That's a whole mad mess. But in Virginia, you normally wouldn't be able to upload and match two unrelated cases.
Correct.
But you can put crime scene DNA
Yes.
into CODIS. So is it that they uploaded the DNA at Teresa's scene and then eventually matched Wilmer to one of them manually? Like how did that all happen?
It was done manually, and it was done on a one-to-one basis. And of course, you and I are both very curious people. I've asked all these questions, and they've refused to answer the questions. But what they have told us is this was based on a one-to-one comparison. So they tested Wilmer against either Teresa Howell or Robin Edwards. My sense is it was probably Robin Edwards because they were working the Colonial Parkway murders case at the time. And I think they realized, oops, we probably should have been tracking Wilmer far more closely than we were, because I think he was off their radar since 88.
Because the thing for me that makes no sense is that if they had, or maybe they developed the DNA when they were trying to match the Wilmer thing, but if they had the DNA from Robin Edwards, they had DNA from Teresa Howell's scene, both of those would have gone into CODIS. So as soon as they would have already known that whoever the unsub or the unknown DNA between those two crimes were linked. So they would have known those crimes were linked. But it seems like they didn't, which is really confusing.
Yeah, and we've asked these questions and they refuse to answer them. I don't think they like the answers. Is what I'm getting at. And again, it's not my goal to embarrass the Virginia State Police or the FBI or any of the law enforcement agencies. I appreciate all the great work that's gone into this case. Have there been mistakes? There have been massive mistakes in the Colonial Parkway murders, which is how we end up with a nearly 40-year-old cold case, which probably could have been closed out in 88 if they had kept their eye on Wilmer. Wilmer kept right on killing and raping people.
After he was identified, right?
Yeah, he just moved off the Colonial Parkway because he'd obviously had a very close encounter with the FBI, but he also knew if I get off federal property, I can keep raping and killing at will, which is basically what he did.
Which makes for the FBI probably more embarrassing that they had him right in their sights. And it's one thing, like I remember talking to someone who was an investigator on the Long Island serial killer case. And, you know, there was this beef in the beginning of that, in the beginning of when the bodies were found.
Yeah.
And, you know, the FBI got broken off of it. And the worry that they had, which I completely got, was the question that they asked me when I got a little information on it was, did he kill anyone after we got knocked off the case? Because what the worry was kicking the FBI off that particular case because they had provided a lot of good data, something that allowed someone else to be killed.
I know, which is horrible. And I understand from a law enforcement person's perspective, they want to put bad guys away and they want to prevent further.
But when you make a mistake, own it. Own it.
Well,
just own it.
No, the FBI so far in the Colonial Parkway murders will absolutely not own any of these mistakes.
I need to go to the FBI Academy and give them a lecture on the great benefits from my own career of owning mistakes. It really works out.
Well, Jason, I don't know why. You know, I make plenty of mistakes in my life, whether it's in
Lord knows, same
personal life, my professional life, whatever. I've never had a problem telling someone that I was sorry for what had happened and that I would try to do better next time and I would try to learn from it. But I have said directly to the FBI, I don't know what it is with you folks. You seem incapable of ever admitting fault or mistake or whatever. And I can, rattle off a pretty impressive and appalling list of mistakes in the Colonial Parkway murders, which is why they went unsolved for so long. And my
Yes.
point is, I'm not smarter than they are, but I don't know why I'm capable of saying, I'm sorry, I learned from this and it won't happen again. And they seem to be completely incapable of forming those words.
Over the years, I've developed a number of relationships with FBI agents because of the reporting or things that I've looked into in true crime. And more than one has said to me, after either hearing you on my podcast or knowing that I knew you, that their impression is that office owes you guys an apology, that they really did you wrong. And so these are other FBI agents in other places. And, they expressed the same thing. They said, it's probably never going to happen because institutionally,
They can't do it.
Yep.
They
won't
can't
do it.
do it. And look, I don't know if it would make that much of a difference, but it would be meaningful to my family for them to say, I'm sorry, this shouldn't have happened.
I agree. And I also think meaningful for all the other law enforcement officials, all, who were involved in the cases, but also they can all learn from it, right?
Yeah.
Every mistake we make is an opportunity for other people to learn and not go through the same mistake. Like I think about my career at the Times, the reason why I'll go tell any journalist about it or any journalism student about it is it's an opportunity for you not to end up in that same insane trap I threw myself in.
Right.
So,
Well, I don't know what it is. It's a cultural thing. This is still J. Edgar Hoover's FBI on some level.
FBI, if you're listening, I'm only 40 minutes from Quantico. My mom is buried at the Marine Corps, at the Army cemetery there. Happy to come down anytime you guys want.
Oh, and I'm sorry about your mom's passing. It's but you could visit her and go over
2 for 1.
Talk to the people at Quantico.
Yeah.
I don't see myself as a critic of law enforcement. I didn't set out to make anybody look bad. Like I said, I make plenty of mistakes. I've made mistakes in my advocacy in this case. I'm sure I've pissed off more people than I probably needed to, or certainly meant to. And there's lots of other things I could have done better, but I don't know. They just don't seem capable of ever admitting fault.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about one of the other cases, because I've been so impressed by what you and Kristen, and I know we haven't talked about Kristen, but I am so impressed by her.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, she's an amazing person. She got involved in this case with no sort of like family or other connection to it, just because she is down there in that area and she cares and she's smart and she asks great questions. But, I've just been impressed by the stuff that you guys have done because, I think for a lot of people who may not listen to your podcast, which I really recommend to people, they may not realize that you guys cover cases that don't have to do with the Colonial Parkway's murders, but you and Kristen are vested in making sure every one of these cases is solved, not just the one connected to you. But one of the things that you and I have talked about that I think is really interesting, Brian Pettinger, who is a 25-year-old equipment operator, he in 1987, so we're talking after Robin Edwards and David Knobling, after Cathy and Becky, he is, I think he was training to be a ballroom instructor, right? And
and he also had a part-time job at Liberty Security.
Right. And then, so that's in 1987. They find him hogtied in a creek that's near, not ridiculously far from Ragged Island, which then is connected to the other cases. Then you have, in 1988, you've got Lorianne Powell, who's also, like a high school student.
Who also works at Liberty Security.
Yeah, also works in Liberty Security. And then all of a sudden, she too disappears and is found in the James River near, drumroll, Ragged Island.
Right.
So we've got two people connected to Liberty Security. Sounds like at least with one of them, it's around the time or even after Wilmer has ended up on their radar screen.
Mm-hmm.
So you got these two who are connected to Liberty Security, which I find odd. But then listening to your podcast and the great work you guys have done interviewing people who knew different players, to hear that then Ron Little, another potential suspect, the one that you mentioned earlier, Ron Little is connected to Liberty Security too.
Yes.
As sort of like being the owner. And as we've talked about, you're running down some leads about Wilmer Sr. and whether he was connected to Liberty Security.
Well, and there's more, because as we go back through the suspects in the Colonial Parkway
and
murders,
I want to remind everybody, we are not talking about a giant security company. We are talking
no, it's
about
a small
company in a small rural area. Like the odds of this, infinitesimal.
Well, and there's more too, because we talked about Robin Edwards a few minutes ago. Robin Edwards' mom, Bonnie, whom I know very well, she works at Liberty Security. And
you would think that Liberty Security was the biggest employer in Virginia.
Yeah, and it's a very small company. And there's more. And again, this starts to get a little bit of a skinnier branch, but it's still worth talking about. Terry Hailey Holman, her married name is, who is Cassandra Hailey's older sister. She dated a guy back when she was single, and that guy did moonlighting shifts at Liberty Security as well. So,
and Cassandra and Keith Call disappeared, am I right, about a month after Lorianne Powell?
Right. The Lorianne Powell and Brian Pettinger murders kind of bracket. They're on either side of the April 1988 disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. Now, both Lorianne Powell, who's now been linked to Wilmer via DNA, they announced that one in November 2025, and Brian Pettinger, who's not yet been linked to anyone via DNA, but their murders are on either side of the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. And we're now working on new information, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a future episode, where we believe there's a personal and professional relationship between Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., the waterman, and Ron Little, the owner of Liberty Security. We still got some work that we need to do, and I'll be heading back down to Virginia if it would ever stop snowing. And it's been a long
Come
winter.
in the spring. It's cold here too.
It's been a long winter.
So just to have the sequence right in our heads, you've got the first murders are back in Cathy. Then you have Robin Edwards and David Knobling.
Almost a year later, the following fall.
Almost a year later. You remember your dad somewhere around 88 mentioning Wilmer Sr. And so that means probably the FBI knows about it then. So we have this series of murders that either happened right before your dad heard about it or after.
Right.
So, okay.
So the only murder actually in the series that we haven't talked about is incident number 4, which is the 1989 murder over Labor Day weekend of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. And they were killed off the Colonial Parkway. They were traveling down Interstate 64 heading to Virginia Beach. And they went missing. His car was found headed in the wrong direction on Interstate 64 that is heading back to Amelia County, Virginia, where they were from. And their bodies are found 6 weeks later under a blanket, side by side, in a hunt club off Interstate 64. And that case...
So also on the Middle Peninsula.
Yes,
That's like the other.
exactly. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Jason, the name the Colonial Parkway murders is a little bit of a misnomer. Only two of the four double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders happen on the Colonial Parkway. The other two happen at Ragged Island, as we talked about with Robin and David, and then on Interstate 64 up in New Kent County. But the
So
media,
everybody we know of now is found on the Middle Peninsula, and then Teresa Howell is on the Virginia Peninsula in the Hampton area. Is that right?
correct.
Okay.
And now, of course, we have Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., the suspect we've talked about. He's now been linked via DNA to 6 murders. So far, he's linked to Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, Robin Edwards and David Knobling, and then 2 single women, Teresa Howell and Lori Ann Powell, kind of similar last names.
Mhm.
And they're both the 2 women are both raped and murdered. So this is a serial killer who is mixing it up. He's attacking both couples and single women. He is using a variety of weapons. So this idea that we sometimes get from probably from television, I would say,
Mhm.
that serial killers always do things in the same way, using the same tools, etc. That you have to throw that out the window. That isn't
Right.
really how serial killers work.
Because a lot of it's about getting away with it, but the things that matter are availability, vulnerability, desirability, and desirability is the first thing that goes out the window.
Sure. And this guy seems to be maybe challenging himself. Uh, Maybe it adds to his excitement
Mhm.
level to take on a couple as opposed to a single woman. It's hard to get inside the man's head because he's been dead since 2017. But you end up with a lot of questions. I'm actually highly confident that if the FBI and the Virginia State Police do their work, I believe that Wilmer will be linked to additional unsolved homicides and rapes. One of the frustrating things we're running into, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, Jason, is the rules for appearing in CODIS in the Commonwealth of Virginia prevent his DNA from being uploaded into CODIS because he was never convicted of a crime prior to his death in 2017. I personally think this is insane. Here we have a confirmed serial killer who's been linked to the murder of at least 6 people, and we still don't have a way of putting his DNA into CODIS. I think that's crazy.
We got to rethink some of these state laws or the way
Right.
the FBI does intake for CODIS or
Yeah.
something legislatively
Well, I
needs to
mean,
happen.
one of the things that is just appalling, and these are things you learn as you go along on a journey like ours. I have no idea why we're running the country in such a half-assed way that we have 50 different sets of rules. It's different in every single state as to what the standards are for having DNA put into CODIS. I don't know why we can't run our country properly. We should have one set of national standards for all 50 states saying here are the parameters of how and when your DNA can be loaded into
Yeah,
CODIS.
because I think of something like this, right? Like if you have an unsolved murder
Mm-hmm.
on the Virginia Peninsula, for example, you're probably, if it fits within the Wilmer time frame, you may want to look at the cases and you may try to do a one-to-one match. But just
Right.
thinking and knowing that geography there, it's really easy to think of it as, like the Middle Peninsula, the Virginia Peninsula. Above that, of course, above both of them is the Northern Neck, where Wilmer lived. But if you live down there, you know that Southern Maryland might as well be a part of the same region.
Exactly.
And so what about cases there?
Well, and this is the kind of thing where we have to figure out a way to get Wilmer's DNA into CODIS. And I'm open to changing the laws in Virginia, or we've also received some advice that we might be able to get a court order a federal judge might be able to rule that, given the circumstances, that Wilmer's DNA could be put into CODIS. But right now, our new case agent, is going out and pitching other law enforcement agencies around Virginia. And I agree with you completely. We should be looking at Maryland and North Carolina and other adjoining states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you don't know the geography, you've got southern Maryland, then the Potomac River,
right,
then the Northern Neck, and then the York River, then the Middle Peninsula, then the James River, and then you go south through Chesapeake, and you're right at the border of North Carolina. They're really a part, if you live down there, they might as well be a part of the same region, but it creates enormous jurisdictional issues because you have all the counties, you have 3 different state police, you have the FBI because they have jurisdiction in national parks. Then you got all the Maryland stuff. And it's a nightmare that you can't sort of like investigate regionally in
correct,
a effective way.
Yeah, and this is something where,
because I've kind of renamed them the Peninsula murders in my head, because I have a hard time believing.
Colonial Parkway murders, we didn't make up the name. We just had to stick with it because that was what people knew them as.
Or maybe Chesapeake Bay murders we could go with, something along those lines. I don't know.
None of them are on the bay per se. They're on all these rivers and inlets. I actually think the Peninsula murders would be a better name, but you got to go with what you got. And newspapers and local television started calling this case the Colonial Parkway murders all those years ago, and we're kind of stuck with it now.
Yeah. Now, so in looking at all of that, so you've got those connections, you're looking into a deeper connection into Wilmer and Ron Little. That starts to get really interesting for me. And I know at first blush, when you look at something like that, you say to yourself, like, what are the odds these guys could all be working together, right? They could be potential accomplices. There's some weird things at the crime scene, like cars being moved, or how did somebody get something there? You know, and I know a lot of people would be like, you guys are insane conspiracy theorists, but there's some
we're not.
There's some, we might be insane, but we're not conspiracy theorists. But there's some things at the scenes that they don't definitely prove that 2 people were involved, because there's a way one could do it, but it would certainly be easier. But simpler, a lot simpler. But then I also think of the other piece of it, you know, maybe some of the differences in these murders have to do with why they were murdered. And by that, I mean, maybe Wilmer did stalk couples and that was his thing, and he occasionally would get a non-couple reason or person. But there have been rumors about Pettinger, people targeting him potentially for a murder.
Right.
You know, what happens when the serial killer meets the guy who murders people for other reasons, like Ron Little's family thinks?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a real head scratcher. It really is, because some of these murders seem like they fit what we believe to be Wilmer's MO, and then others seem outside. But as we've had some fantastic conversations recently with profilers on Mind Over Murder, and these FBI trained profilers have said this guy may be both, there may be planned homicides here, and there may also be opportunistic, where he'll see a single woman, let's say Teresa Howell, who was seen at the club Zodiac, which was an after-hours club that technically you had to be a member of. This would be the place you'd go if you hadn't gotten drunk enough.
The after party, the
bar,
after-hours club. Yeah.
And as I understand it, it was very loosey-goosey. They weren't terribly strict about who got in to the after-hours club. If you knew someone, you would be admitted. And they believe that Wilmer met Terry in the parking lot outside. He might not have actually even been inside the Zodiac that night. But it's situations like that where he seems to be taking advantage of situations that are presented. We heard a very interesting story from a woman recently who said that she and a group of female friends were out bar hopping one night, and they ended up at the Zodiac. But she had run into Wilmer. She's pretty certain. Wilmer is pretty distinctive, handsome guy, very buff, but very short. He's like 5'5", 5'6", so well out of the
Below
average range, and with sort of sandy blonde hair. And she said she met him in a bar and was chatting with him. And then her name is Tammy. Tammy tells us that she and her girlfriends are then, moving on from that place to the next place. And at some point late into the evening, she is walking into or out of the Zodiac. Who steps out of the shadows and says, "Hello, Tammy"? It's Wilmer. And she said it was very clear to them that he had followed them from the last bar they'd been in to the Zodiac. And she was pretty freaked out about it. So,
and it kind of fits something that leans into your whole liberty security theory, or not theory, but the stuff you're exploring there. Maybe with all those connections, a parent worked there, a fill in the blank worked there.
right.
If you get a really sort of like fantasy driven serial killer who can wait, they can start following you around, and they can start following you around for a while before they decide to do it. And then they could also do more opportunistic ones. And another thing that I think about in thinking of all the work you guys have done at Liberty Security, it always reminds me of Israel Keyes has talked about this. A lot of people have talked about this who are sort of psychopathic killers. They'll feel people around them out. And Keyes tells this story about like killing a cat and paying attention and noticing who reacted to it in a really negative way and who didn't. And then just pushing it a little further, that if these guys, Little and Wilmer, met and they sort of sent the signals somehow that they were dangerous or didn't mind killing, and saw the other wasn't reacting in a negative way, who knows where that might have gone.
Yeah, I've wondered about this, not being of a mind to hurt people. But we asked the FBI, and they answered in a very interesting way. They said sometimes not nice people, and they mean extremely not nice people, hang out with other really not nice people. Now, I don't know what the secret handshake is where you get around to the point where someone admits, "Oh yeah, I get off on raping and killing people too." It's still hard for me to wrap my brain around
This is sad, Bill, because I think I do know what the secret handshake is.
Unbelievable.
It starts with like, something like talking about your sexual relationships and back and forth, and then mentioning some crazy thing you did and the other person not reacting, and then mentioning, I'm not sure if she really wanted to, right? And then reacting to, and then it just rolls and rolls and rolls. I've seen that one play out.
Yeah. Boy, you hang out with some really not nice people.
I surely do.
Wow. It's just chilling, though, when you think about it, that these people find each other. Now, we've known lots of people over the years that have paired up and committed all sorts of heinous crimes. So this might be one of those situations. We have a lot more work to do. And I did mention some of this to the FBI when we met a month ago. And my intention is actually to go back and sit down with some of these people that have talked to us about this and see if we can develop this further before I go back to the FBI, because I actually think we may be able to prove that there's a relationship, a personal and professional relationship between Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. and Ron Little, for example. And then there are these living potential accomplices. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but there are people that are part of this mix who are still very much alive, but may be involved.
Do you think that's part of the reason why they're hush-hush about it?
Well, and I do try to be charitable.
You try to give them the benefit of the doubt?
Give them the benefit of the doubt. That is entirely possible. And would I be thrilled to see law enforcement arrest, indict, convict, and sentence living suspects? Because, man, it's frustrating to be told, oh, yeah, the SOB that killed your sister died in 2017. It's not that I'm looking forward to sitting through a lengthy trial, but I think there would be some small satisfaction for the Colonial Parkway murders families if any living suspects who were identified were arrested.
Yeah, it really does make me wonder whether, even thinking about it, trying to be generous to the FBI, that even if there's somebody who's alive that they haven't ruled out yet, that may cause greater caution. So we may have a mix of embarrassment, institutional embarrassment, caution.
I get that. When you said, we're trying to be charitable towards the FBI, I thought to myself,
I mean, they're humans too.
They do make it difficult. But I am prepared to grant them that they could easily be working on additional leads. Now, I guess the one thing I would say is time's a waste in here. Families have been waiting for answers for 40 years. And can we please, get a move on here? Because it's very frustrating. There are 8 victims in what we would refer to as the core part of the Colonial Parkway murders, which actually seems to be expanding as we move forward here.
I think that's a great place to stop. Thanks for joining Bill and I. We'll be back next week. And we're going to take you to the third peninsula, the one where Wilmer Sr. and my family live, the Northern Neck. We're going to talk about a curious murder that happened there before Cathy and Becky were killed, that of Mary Keyser Harding, a mom who was attacked at her home. Over time, it became clear that another waterman was wrongfully convicted in the murder, and it's emerged that it has a connection to the Wilmer family. We're also going to talk about the wisdom of Jill and Dan Harrington, the parents of Morgan Dana Harrington, who was abducted at the University of Virginia in 2009. One of the things that they've taught Bill and I is about how we can have compassion for the families of suspects. We're also going to explore why Bill suspects there might be living offenders connected to some of the crimes, why justice delayed is justice denied, and why this investigation and his investigation of the investigation are not over. If you would like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us at our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again next week.